book that he wrote the day after Roswell. It's on back order here. We'll be getting it later this week. It's a wonderful book that is the first book to come out in the UFO field to tell some hard evidence of what has happened from Roswell and after Roswell, and how the alien technology was used. Colonel Corso has a very distinguished military career that I've actually told them about already. I warmed them up and gave them a lot of information about you already. And one of the things that I was most impressed with when I met him, not far from his home, was that when we left to say goodbye, he got into a car that I wasn't sure was really his. It was a purple Firebird. He says to me, his family thinks he's crazy, 80 years old, and he went out to buy a purple Firebird.
Yeah. Well, tell him, I wanted a younger man's car, not an old man's car.
Exactly. He said to me, if I can drive a tank, then I can drive a purple Firebird. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you a very distinguished man, Col Philip J Corso.
Well, the first thing I want to tell you when I look at this audience, I'm really proud to be here. Now, I don't speak from a prepared text, and I want you to ask me questions. I want you to guide me. Tell me what you want to know. I'll try to answer your questions. A lot I can't answer because this subject, I don't know the answers to a lot of things. But I will try the best, and I want you to ask me questions. Don't worry about losing my trend of thought. I will stop and answer your questions if I can. And I always do that. I don't like to get up here and run the show. I want you, it's your show. And really, all of you remind me of one of the proud things I've done in my life. The Army saw fit to give me command of a combat battalion, 1,500 men. Average age of those boys was 19 and a half, even with no codger like me in command. And I used to sit them in the field, just like you're sitting here. And I was proud of those boys. And this reminds me almost of that. All of you sitting there. And I know this subject here, a lot of people say, well, thank you, you had the courage to write it. It didn't take courage. My own grandchildren, my nephew, who was a research director of a corporation, he said, please, Uncle Phil, tell us. We want to know. And that influenced me. No one has ever told me not to talk. I did this book, and I speak here on my own free will. No one has told me what to talk or what to say. I tell you the truth as I know it. And I want you to help me by asking questions. Now, I will start at the beginning almost. My first experience, when I came back from World War II, and I was Chief of Security and Intelligence of Rome Area Command at the time, I was sent to the Pentagon. I didn't like it, so I asked for another assignment. So they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas. And it was a good tour. First time in my life I'd had garrison tour. Before that, I was always in the combat area. So while I was there, one night I was the post-duty officer. That meant that I was in charge that night, and I was responsible for the guards. So I went down, we still had horses then, I went down to the veterinarian area, and I was told in my instructions that there was a sensitive area down there. So I went down, and one of the sergeants I knew real well who was the Army champion of bowling. I used to bowl with him. And he was a sergeant of the guard. And I went to inspect the guard, and he asked me, he said, Colonel, you want to see something? I told him, well, this is a pretty sensitive area. Yes, what do you have? So he took me in the back room, and there was 6 crates there. And so I had my flashlight, and I turned it on the crates, and I lifted the tarpaulin one, and I was a little stunned because I saw a body in there. I thought at first it was a child, but then I looked closer, and I saw the oversized head. Not a great big head. For the body, it was big. And I saw the eyes. And immediately, I realized what it was. It had long arms, long fingers, 4 on each hand, and it had like a skin-tight suit on. And it was floating in some sort of liquid. And they were on their way to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they'd come from New Mexico. The drivers told my sergeant. It was an alien extraterrestrial in there that I saw. Now, I looked at it, maybe, I'm telling you all this, but not even as long as I took to describe it to you, only about 10 or 15 seconds. And then I just let it pass. I figured I'm an intelligence officer, so maybe someday later in the future I'll be able to corroborate this, what this is and what it was. And I promptly forgot about it. Then 10 years passed. Right after that, soon after that, I ended up, another war started in Korea. It took off right at the beginning, and I was pretty busy for the next 3 years. Then I ended up at Panmunjom. I was a member of the truth delegation. And I met our prisoners as they were being exchanged. And I've testified in front of Congress 3 times on the missing prisoners of war. Maybe some of you saw me. I was on prime time in 2020. They wanted to know about the prisoner. Actually, on MacArthur's staff, I was in charge of the missing prisoners of war in enemy territory. And then I came back from the Korean War, and I got assigned to the White House, which was sort of a surprise. The special assistant of the president sent for me, and I became a member of the White House staff, National Security Council under President Eisenhower. And I was there for 4 years. I handled prisoner of war things, even flying saucer reports. They knew about it. President Eisenhower knew about it, because I discussed it with him. And I had every clearance that you could have. I had 9 in addition to top secret. And I was actually on the National Security Council. And I stayed there 4 years. I was supposed to go for 3 years, but they extended me a year, so I stayed 4. At the end of the 4th year, I received orders to take command of the Army missile firing range at White Sands in New Mexico. And I took command of this range. But first, an order appears from the Secretary of the Army, Mr. Brucker, extending me the 5th year. So I went to the President, Eisenhower, and I told him, Mr. President, all my life I wanted a major command. Now they've given it to me. But they extended me here for another year. If I stay, that command won't be there next year. Of course, you understand, Mr. President. And he looked at me and smiled. He said, I understand. You get on that phone and call Career Branch. You're taking over your command tomorrow. And he released me. And I ended up at White Sands, New Mexico, right near where the saucer crashed. I commanded the range there for the Army. And I had an experience there which confirmed what I saw. A strange thing happened. Since I was the commander of the base, of the Army base there, not of White Sands, the whole northern area was my area, and I used to fire missiles there. So I took over, and I used to wander around a lot, but the boys thought nothing about it because I used to wander around in my Jeep and command in the desert. Well, one day I got in I got a little angry with White Sands. They were experimenting on the Polaris missile, so they were holding me up. I couldn't fire my missiles. And I told the general at Fort Bliss, why don't we move out here and make our own base? So this continues. So one day I took off in my Jeep, and by the way, I've never told this story in public, and I'm going to tell you now. Because as I look at you, I think you want to hear this. So I took my Jeep and I went down range. A little angry at White Sands because I had 400 men doing nothing. I couldn't fire till they gave me what we called green time. So I was running around down range, and I decided my sergeants had showed me an abandoned gold mine. It was on the range. And there was this gold mine, had water trickling out, and deer and antelope and even rattlesnakes used to come there because of the water. And people don't realize that the desert is full of life. There's a lot of animals, herds of deer, antelope. In fact, my men adopted a burro, and I wasn't allowed to keep him because the Maverick laws in New Mexico say you can't keep wildlife. So I wrote to the governor, darn if he didn't come out with an entourage, flew out, newspapermen and all, and gave us permission to keep the burro, the little donkey. So it belonged to us from then on. Well, he grew up pretty big. Then he used to come to the officers club and bray, so we had to get out and give him a cigarette to eat and a glass of beer to drink. And then, when this was a burro, and then he'd leave. And every VIP day, which was Thursday when we'd had people and we'd fire missiles for him, he would disappear. And the boys would have to get in their Jeeps and go catch him. And the reason he disappeared, we had a red blanket we put on him with a Nike missile on it, and he didn't like that blanket, so he'd run down the desert. And they'd go catch him and bring him back. And he was a little unhappy. In fact, the boy used to tell me, Colonel, be careful. If you get behind him, he'll kick you, and if you get in the front, he'll bite you. And he did one day. He grabbed my uniform. But later on, I made friends with him, I think. And we had this burro. So going back to where I was, and I was going down range in my Jeep. And I figured, I'm going to the gold mine. It's 110 degrees out here. At least it's cool in there. So I went in the gold mine, walked in, I sat there. And it was cool, so I dozed off. Then as I was dozing off all at once, I reached down and lifted the flap on my 45. I pulled it out, and I pulled the safety off, and I rolled over. And there was something in the corner. Something was draped around the shoulders. And I looked, I figured, what is this, a rattlesnake curled up? But if I fire this pistol in this cave, ricochets might get me, so I better not. And at that moment, I heard something. Something came in my head that said, don't. And then I got the real surprise. So when I heard don't, I figured, what is that thing there? It had a helmet on, like glass, that was transparent, a band around its head with the thing in the middle. So I answered, I said, friend or foe? What are you? And then I get an answer back which really shocked me. I asked him friend or foe, and the answer came back, remember, this was all mental telepathy, because the aliens have no vocal cords. So the answer came back, and the answer was neither. So now, remember, I was a soldier. I think in terms of the enemy. But this thing answered me, whatever it was, said neither. So that started me thinking, am I hallucinating here or going crazy? I'm supposed to be a pretty level-headed commander. So all at once I hear, will you give me 10 minutes radar downtime? And then I got confused. I figured, I'm the only man that can give that order. Did this thing know I was here? No one else can give that order but me. And it asked me. So, typical human being, I was thinking in my mind, if I give that order, what's in it for me? So, that's a typical human reaction. So I said, what do you offer? I didn't say what's in it for me. I said, what do you offer? Because the other was two stupid human being words. So finally I got the answer back, which I still don't know what it means. I asked Whitley Strieber, who wrote Communion, what it means. He gave me 3 different answers. This happened in 1957. The answer came back to me. What was his offer? The offer was this: a new world if you can take it. Now, and I thought, what does that mean? What is that he's offering me? So at that stage, I put my .45 back in the holster, put the safety on, and I went out to my Jeep. And I picked up the radio, and I called Captain Williams, range commander. From Captain, this is a colonel. You get green time from White Sands? He said, yes, just came through. I'm giving you an order. Keep our radars down for 10 minutes. I repeat, keep our radars down for 10 minutes, and I'm coming in. I'm on my way. So then I turned around, and I see this thing, the light was reflecting off of the water, standing at the cave entrance. And it had a tight-fitting suit on, like the thing I saw in the casket at Fort Riley, not the casket, the box. So I figured he was standing there, and I looked over, and I figured, now what? It's watching me. So I saluted. I went like that. And I took off in my Jeep. And it would take me, I'd say, from where I was in the desert, about 20 minutes to get back. And I gave him, the order was 10 minutes downtime. I had pretty powerful radars. I had radars in those days that the pencil beam would lock on 200 miles out. In fact, if you came in my area and I showed you the missile like newspaper men, I used to tell them, please take the flash bulbs out of your pocket. You can take all the pictures you want, but take the flash, because the moment I turn my radars on, they'll go off in your pocket. They're so powerful. So, range headquarters called me. It was about 15 minutes later. He said, stop at E Battery and pick up the tapes. We picked up something on the radar and locked on. It was going over 3,500 miles an hour. I remember it's 1957. There was nothing could travel that fast that we had. So, all at once I hear, I return your salute. And I figured, well, I'm military, and that's a logical thing. I'm imagining this thing. But then they picked up this thing traveling that fast, going out of the area. Then I thought, I wonder if that thing, whatever it was, is in that flying saucer. I didn't see it. My radars picked it up. And that was, so then I figured, I better forget this. I'm supposed to be a pretty solid type commander. And if I report this at high headquarters, who doesn't want to hear it anyway, I might get tabbed as a kook. And after all, I had orders to take over command of the 1st Missile Battalion going to Germany that had atomic warheads. And I was made Air Defense Commander of Southern Germany when I went over there. And I don't want to jeopardize that. So I didn't report it to anybody or say anything about it. Till now. I didn't even write this in the book. So, in the meantime, I meet Jacques Vallee. Maybe you've heard of him. He's one of the, I think, top authorities on UFOs. Brilliant man. The movie Close Encounters, he was the man, the Frenchman, who was guiding everything. So I met Jacques Vallee, and I told him this story. And Jacques Vallee told me, he said, "Colonel, are you an alien?" I told him, "Jack, you're a pretty brilliant guy. You should know better than ask me that." And then he said, "You know they weren't interested in you shutting your radars down. What makes you say that?" He said, "They were testing you. You have any evidence of that?" "Yes." "Where were you 3 years later?" Sitting in the Pentagon, I was the chief of Foreign Technology Division of Army Research and Development, with full authority to give contracts out, and I had all these artifacts. I was actually in charge. He said, "What do you think they were driving at?" I told him, "Well, Jack, for want of a better explanation, I'll take your explanation." Maybe he was right, I don't know. But I was in that position, he was right. I had the artifacts, I was responsible for them. Even my critics lately have been looking up my record on the internet. They found out he was really chief of the Foreign Technology Division. And he disappeared for 3 weeks. That was on the internet, and I figured, wouldn't they like to know where I went and what I did? They don't know that, they're so smart, these skeptics, and I answer the skeptics. I say, you shoot your mouth off and you bleat like stuck pigs and you want to say, show me. If I showed you what we had, you wouldn't know what it was anyway. I told them, so don't ask that question. I don't try to pass your stupidity off on me. So I don't answer those critics. They're not worth answering. So I was sitting in the Pentagon, and actually, and then the internet also said, I'll go back to that I left foreign technology and I went up to Plans Division, which was true. I became the general's top assistant. And I was even put on the Army General Staff Corps. And I always thought for a draftee, that's pretty good. I was pretty proud of that, because that's usually reserved for West Pointers and such. And here, I used to take these artifacts, and one day I had them out on my desk. The General Trudeau walked in, head of research and development, and he said, "Phil, what do you got there? Looks like your junk pile." And I told him, "Yes, General, it looks like junk, doesn't it?" I had a bundle of wires, a piece of metal about this big, a supercapacitor fiber, a transistor, integrated circuit, and some other items, a little flashlight and things. I had a little flashlight and thing, and I couldn't get it to come on. And like a typical stupid human, I figured the battery was dead. And it came out of the flying saucer. When I took it to our atomic labs, it came on. I thought I was thinking in human terms that there was a battery in there, and it was dead. There was no battery in there. It had its own power source. I sent that to Fort Monmouth, our laboratories. And the general used to call. He said, "Yes, Phil, it's your junk pile, but those things could change the world." Now, one thing I want to tell you, though, at this stage of the game, don't think that we were so brilliant and so smart that we knew what we had. We didn't. But we had an instinct that they were valuable, that there was something there. I didn't know what a transistor was. Nobody ever knew what. I didn't know what an integrated circuit was. Yet I was in charge of exploiting these things. And didn't know what I had, really. I had a bunch of wires, fiber optics. They wouldn't blink in colors. When I closed my hand, they started to blink in colors. My own hand activated it. So the general said, "Phil, we got to lay plans. This is your file now." And I told him, yes, when I opened the drawer, the flying saucers fly in and out. So he said, "Now what you got to do, take off, go out to visit big industries, our laboratories, and find out who is working along these lines, what I think these things are." So I did. And gradually I started to farm them out in regular research and development projects we had to cover our tracks because of the climate of opinion. Certain people in the government, Congress, they would have destroyed our budget. They would have tabbed us in kooks and destroyed our organizations. So among the few officers who were in the loop, we kept this to ourselves. No paper trail. As the things went out to industry, I had authority to finance them. I had the organization. I even had German scientists on my team, von Braun's people. Now, little by little, I'll tell you what these things were that we had there. So gradually, these started to go out to industry. But we put certain, now everybody says government cover-up. There was no government cover-up. Because of the situation, we had to keep it quiet among ourselves. No paper trail, only mouth to mouth among officers, all had been in combat, we trusted each other. We were able to cover our tracks and we were able to accomplish a lot. So I had the authority to grant the contracts. The provision was, though, there was one provision in there. Take the items we give you, develop them and use them the way you want. And now, American Computer is suing Bell Laboratories, said we gave them the transistor and they took out patents on it. We didn't care. We couldn't make money. As long as you develop it and give it to American people, we'll finance you. That was our provision, and it worked. Lately, when I wrote to some of them and asked for some documents, they said, remember what your contract read. Send everything back to you. And it was true. It was, the contracts were written that way. So we gave it for the competitive edge of the Army and to give it to the people, the developments. And look what came out of them. Now, let me give you another story at this stage of the game, and I'll get in. I had what we called a super tenacity fiber. Fiber looked like a piece of string. You couldn't cut it, you couldn't dent it, you couldn't set it on fire, you couldn't do anything with it. And I sent it to a Lincoln Laboratories at MIT. And they looked at it, they said, the atoms are lined in it. They were lined, they weren't helter-skelter. So I started searching around for something that was equal to that, because there was no reference to go back to. This was something, a new science like. So what did we find that the closest thing to this super tenacity fiber was, and I like to tell this story, the spider web. The spider spins his web atomically aligned. We made flak jackets out of it, and it stopped bullets. You can take the spider's web and you can stretch it for miles and it won't break. Marvelous little thing. So we financed Wyoming University. We gave them a contract to try to clone the spider. They didn't succeed. So we weren't getting enough fibers. So we went to development of the present composites, Kevlar and that. Monsanto and DuPont was given the contracts. I gave the fiber optics to Bell Lab, and also I gave them later the integrated circuit. And now this was one of the first things that we gave out. Then we gave the transistor out. Now, the suit right now, which is bubbling all over the internet, American Computer is accusing Bell Laboratories of getting patents on a transistor when the Army really gave it to them, which we did. And they're threatening to sue them now. They said it belongs to the American people, it didn't belong to you, you took patents out on it, you lied. I was on the Art Bell show not long ago, and they had one of the reverse speeches men on. And he brought that up, that I said in my talk to Art Bell, it came out in reverse speech, which is going to replace a lie detector, they claim, that I said illegal patents. I didn't say that, but on the computer, when he reversed the speech, it came out that way. And they took illegal patents. The integrated circuit, which was the size of a quarter, I gave those to Bell Lab. That was my job to give that out. So, marvelous development started, and we'd watch them. Every time they slowed up, reaching the state of the art and they were stopped, we'd feed them a little more. But as a research and development contract, not as a transistor. They never knew where they came from. and they could take it and use it any way they wanted and develop it, which they did. On the Art Bell show, too, I met the research director of Stanford University lately, and he said, I heard you on the Art Bell show, and it's supposed to reach an audience of about 20 million, they claim. He's on late at night for 3 or 4 hours. I've been on his program twice, and this gentleman told me, he said, I know what you did. When you said artificial life that von Neumann was working on, and Art Bell corrected you, said artificial intelligence, you hemmed and hawed and you didn't correct him. I told him, the only man that possibly caught that could have been you, of all the people who were listening. That's right. I really was talking about artificial life and not artificial intelligence. I had a file from von Neumann, a genius that they accused him of being an alien. He actually was one of the brains behind perfecting the atomic weapon, atomic bombs and things. And he was working on artificial life. And I didn't do anything with that file, and I should have. That file in itself was valuable, but I didn't know enough about artificial life. Now it's coming out, if you've seen it in computers and all. And possibly they'll be able to create an artificial life on computers in the near future. This is a definite possibility, because they're doing it now with geese and animals. And they actually pick up, the computer picks up actually the movements and how the ducks and so forth fly in the air and react. So I really did nothing with that when I should have. Then lately I wrote to a scientist and I sent him a thing that I wrote in my handwriting on fiber optics. We developed that through Bell Laboratory. And the scientist called me back. He runs Institute of Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas. He said, Phil, I looked over this fiber optics. Well, you know a lot about fiber optics. He said, this little thing you wrote for me is really something. I told him, you think so, Hal? He said, yes. Glad you sent it to me. Now, I'm going to give you the surprise. I didn't write that now. Put the date on it. The date that was written was 1961. And he said, it can't be. I told him, it is now. I wrote that in 1961 when we were starting on fiber optics. Now look what happens. The telephone lines, the fiber, and I didn't know what we had. I didn't know whether it was wires, tubes, or what it was when I had those in my hand. So what I tell you, don't think for a minute that we knew everything we had. We didn't. The Army in those days, it was fluid hydrodynamics.
Some people are having trouble hearing. You gotta be hearing your hands now.
Okay. I have to hold the napkin like Pavarotti does in my hands.
Just speak up a little.
Yeah. So we perfected the first heart pump, 1961. The Army perfected laser cataracts, 1961. We made the first respirator. I talked to Senator Glenn one day and I showed him a photograph of a little cart we made that ran on water. He wanted a picture of it. We also, in those days, it's in the book, there's 50 pages in the book, we worked out on instructions from the general what we called Project Horizon. Project Horizon was to put a military colony on the moon against all enemies. And of course we told Congress, a lot of times there was a lot of stupidity there, and we made them think that we were perfecting this against the communists and the Russians, when really it was aimed at the extraterrestrials. And Project Horizon, there's 50 pages in the book, it was really 310 pages long. I went to see Senator Glenn, and he insisted I gave it to him. I had to give him my only copy that I had at the time. And I knew about that project because I declassified it. Recently, a scientist that I know gave a copy of that to the NASA board, directors, and they were shocked. They never knew such a thing existed in 1959. And if you read the book, there's 50 pages on the back, because the book, we couldn't put the whole 310 pages in. And that was the beginning of all this, and the development started to come out of this. For example, my grandchildren, the oldest one is 15, I have a computer at home, and the internet's on it and everything, the copier and all. And I told my son, isn't it strange? I told him, I'm the one that possibly had the biggest hand in developing that thing. And I don't even know how to turn it on. and my own grandchildren, 9 years old and 12 and 15, turn it on and work. I taught in school. And maybe I'm the one that made it, and General Trudeau said the things we did, Phil, might change the world. That computer existed because we put out the transistors and integrated circuit. Now look what it's doing. And the brain, the great brain, doesn't even know how to turn it on, to push the switches. And my grandchildren laugh at that when I tell them that. I tell them, well, that wasn't my job to work it. Somebody else does that. But now, the bad part. 50 years have passed, almost, since then. Well, really, almost 40 years. But as I'm looking at the thing now, the way we operated, when we saw that development was slowing down, we fed more information in. Now, as I look at the computers and the chips, the integrated circuits, unfortunately, they're reaching the end of the line. If I was still in charge, I would put a little infusion in there if I had it, to get them moving in the right direction. Maybe they'll give us another chance. Maybe they'll give us another saucer. And I don't know, I never figured it out, whether they gave us these developments and these saucers by design or by chance. We didn't care. We had them. That was the main thing. And we used them. And we were able to bring some great developments in the world. Even the MRI machines that you see in hospitals. We started that with microprocessors and so forth. And it's developing. But one day the general called me in and he said, Phil, in 5 years, we did what should have taken 250 years. Will we have to wait another 250 years? I hope not, because I'm 82 years old, I'm passing by, but all of you are young yet. You want these developments to continue. And I hope they will, and I think they will. And I just told the people here, something will happen. There'll be another crash, by chance or design, I don't know. But I think it'll happen again. We will get the future. It'll be in there. And there was one great mistake, though, that I made, and I have to blame myself. The greatest gift that they gave us was not the artifacts, because I was a type of person, when I got the artifacts, my profession was military. So when I took these artifacts, the main movement was towards the competitive edge of the Army. That meant that I took these artifacts, and the main effort was to develop weapons of destruction. And I look back, that was wrong. The greatest gift they gave us, we missed out on. They gave us an alien body, a wonderful thing. Now I'm trying to recollect everything I know about that, the autopsies that were made at Walter Reed, our laboratory, and recreate this thing. Could we duplicate it? A wonderful thing, a clone, a humanoid clone, but built for a specific purpose, to travel in space. Man can't travel in space today. Our astronauts, they stay up there more than a month or so, their bones deteriorate, their muscles deteriorate, their immune system goes haywire, their sense of balance goes off, the heart enlarges, blood pressure goes down, they get disoriented, and some of them, their brain has been affected. Because zero gravity and all are things that we haven't solved yet. So the big mistake is I actually have to blame myself almost. And I'll tell you young people is, I should have made I had the money, the talent, the organization. I should have taken that extraterrestrial and started a research project, #1 priority. We didn't do it. We lost out on it. And people say, you can't blame yourself. I have to blame myself. I was in charge. Why didn't I do it? So maybe it wasn't time yet. That's no excuse. I should have done it. So now it has to be done. That extraterrestrial can travel in space. We can't. NASA's spending all this money, but man can't travel in space, unfortunately. We can't explore the heavens. No. Well, this is the beginning of all this. I got a lot more to tell you. But start asking me questions. You surely want to know more than I've told you.
Colonel, can you tell us a little bit more about what you saw about the alien physiology?
About the alien?
Alien physiology?
No, what, on the alien, the way he was built?
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about their bodies and how they were different and all that?
Sure. So I figured one day to make up my shortcoming and where I was remiss, I have to start getting in my head everything that I learned about the alien. When I had the reports, autopsy reports from Walter Reed, our laboratory we financed, they had to do what we told them to do. I had to put all this together in my head. And from that, I have to reverse intelligence. I learned intelligence very fortunate when I was a lieutenant. I was sent to London, and I was picked up by British MI-19, one of their oldest intelligence outfits. They were experts. And they taught me intelligence, a very fortunate thing for me. And I was very lucky about that. And they sent me to Cambridge for 3 weeks. I can stand up here and brag it, I went to Cambridge. And I went there because the British had a saying, how green is our ally? But later they said, you learned fast, and you outdid us in a lot of areas. Now the British intelligence works a little different than ours. We go after targets and things, but the British intelligence goes after intentions. What's the enemy's intention? So when I started on this extraterrestrial body, recollection, the starting point is the intention. Why did his creators or the cloners do? What intention they have of this thing that they made? He's not in the sense the clone like we talk about clones and this thing in the sheep now of creation and they'll live forever. The extraterrestrial was not that at all. And we gave it the name extraterrestrial biological entity is what it is. So when I start putting this together and I reverse engineered it, or intelligent, and I went through the whole body like Evel's asked me to do. The brain, for example, there's 4 lobes there. We only have 2. There was no communication devices in this flying saucer. There was no food. There was no water. There was no toilet facilities. There was no oxygen. And the general even asked me this, my God, Phil, you reverse engineered this, what's not in there? How they survive, how they live. Tesla gave us the clue. The electromagnetic beings, they propagate by electronic magnetism. The flying saucers are an environment that's enclosed in electronic element. We've never been able to fly a flying saucer. We've never been able, and we just had this discussion, because the extraterrestrial is part of the flying saucer. He's the brain. He's the guidance system. He's part of it. He controls that by his fingers. Each fingertip of ours has 8,000 nerve ends to it. His brain has a different windings. He had a brain implant, which his creators programmed. And he supplied the energy for the flying saucer. So every time we tried to fly this flying saucer, the Germans had one, they crash. Because we make the mistake of what we called product improvement, not research and development. And you can't start to take an airplane and improve it to put it in space. It won't work. This is a new science, a different science. And the extraterrestrials were built with that specific purpose. The one lobe is the brain of the flying saucer. It's programmed by his superiors. The other is a communication system. There's no communications in the flying saucer. Well, they communicate through the other lobe. The two rear lobes are like ours, body functions and so forth. So the key to the flying saucer is the extraterrestrial. Now, instead of me getting all these letters I got from the general public, and I have hundreds of letters at home, and they're piling up, I haven't had time to answer them. And I'll have to answer them because these were good people writing to me. And now it's changing. Instead of me getting letters from the general public, scientists are starting to call me. They saw in the book that the extraterrestrial was part of the flying saucer. They were all one. Now, Burt Rutan, the big designer that flew around the world, he came to my house special, all the way from Mojave Desert, California. Spoke to him for 7 hours. He wants to be the first civilian in space. You can't do it by building airplanes, what you're building, to take somebody in space. Can't be done. This is a new science, and we treat it as product improvement. It isn't. You can't do that. So, for example, one simple thing. The extraterrestrial had no hair. I figured his creator has hair. Why didn't they give him hair? He didn't need it. Also, hair is a bother. Little hairs come loose, dandruff comes off, it can foul up your electronic equipment. He didn't need hair. So his creators didn't give him any hair. He didn't need any ears. He doesn't have to hear. He doesn't have to collect sound. He gets his instructions through programming of the brain and mental telepathy. He has no nose. He doesn't breathe oxygen. There's no oxygen in that thing. What's he breathe? We don't know. There was a funny smell in the flying saucer. He breathes something. I don't know what it is. He only has two holes. He has no mouth. He doesn't eat. He doesn't need to. Lately, I talked to my doctor. He operated on me not too long ago. Actually, 2 years ago, I had a serious thing in my stomach, and he saved my life. I talked to my doctor, and he said, well, Phil, how do they propagate? I told him, well, Doc, take a look at us. We're human beings. What if we don't get any nourishment? What happens? We die and fade away. Exactly what happens to them. You take them out of their environment, which is electromagnetism, they fade away and die. They need that envelopatory and electronic. All the ones we got, they faded fast. That's the reason. He said, well, I guess that's right. A human will fade just as fast if you don't have no nourishment. Their nourishment is electromagnetism. Now, I've never told this in public. That's what these scientists are calling me for. They want to know. And one of them lately, pretty famous scientist, he said, I read your book. Now I read it the second time, and I see what you left out. You didn't state the whole story. So, well, you recognized it. I only told you 10% of the story. Why? Too much for the public to try to read that all at one time. It was, for many years, it was a little too much for me and us. So how did I expect the public to know? And I used to tell my commanders, I'll tell you a funny story. When my commanders came and gave me their reports, monthly reports, and I'd look at it and I'd say, Grant's Major, the boys would reach over and grab the paper out of my hand and take off and rewrite it. We had a joke in the Army. The General Grant had a major sitting outside his office, Civil War, and this major had the reputation of being the dumbest, most stupidest man in the whole Union Army. So the Secretary of War came one day and he told General Grant, I know you. That stupid man there has become a legend in the Union Army. He's so dumb, stupid, and you keep him there. Why? I'm your boss, you got to tell me. Grant said, well, I guess I have to tell you. When I write a field order, I hand it to him. If he understands it, everybody does. So, this is the answer why I didn't put everything in the book. I have to take a lot of these things that I did, and I have to explain it in simple terms. So even General Grant's major would understand them. Otherwise, I know that I will go over, and my main aim and what I really like to do is the young people. They're the ones that say, tell us, we want to know. So I aim at them like my grandchildren. I can't start at the top and explain it to them. I got to start down where I can build it up and explain it to them. And I've been mobbed by young boys. They want to know. I tell newsmen a story, and I told them my nephew was a research director at Dayco Corporation. He wrote to me, and he said, Uncle Phil, tell us. We want to know. We're not going to pull our hair out and beat our breast. Let us know. And I told him, and gentlemen, I told 400 newsmen this. I'll give you an example. I commanded a combat battalion of 1,500 soldiers. Average age, I told 19 and a half. Those boys didn't beat their breast and panic. They fought the greatest army in the world and defeated it. They didn't run. Some died, but they defeated the greatest army, and they didn't run and panic. They're not going to panic. Tell them about the flying saucers. They should know. It's their world coming, not ours. We're too old, but they're going to be around. My own grandchildren want to know. I got to tell them that. And I started to write the book mainly for my grandchildren. I figured I had to leave them a legacy. So I started writing after the general relieved me of my oath. And then my little one, redhead, a real con man. And I tell my daughter-in-law, she said, they con you. I told him, grandfather should be calm, and I love it. I know I'm being conned. He wants to borrow money from me. I told him, yeah, but how are you going to pay it back, Andy? Then he starts to think. I told him, that's all right. I told him, you owe me. You pay someday. Well, this little guy was standing there after they asked me what I did during the war, and I started writing. And this little one comes up to me. He said, hey, Granddad, did you ever see E.T.'s grandfather? You know, the movie E.T.? And I looked at him, and I told him, Andy, maybe I have. You get a little older, I'll tell you about it. This was the cave incident, you know. I thought maybe he was E.T.'s grandfather. Now, many people have asked me, how old are they? Well, that sort of throws me. So here's the way I explain that. I had one report and only one. And I had all the clearances, access to everything at the White House, all access to everything in the government. And I had one report that came from a laboratory that said this extraterrestrial was 200 years old. Now, I can't prove that. I have no further evidence. This is based on a single report. In intelligence, that's not worth much. But that's all I can say. I don't know anymore. I've been asked many times, where'd they come from? My answer to that is, I wish I knew. We don't know. Maybe we will someday. I can't tell you I know, I don't know. And I explain most of these things that way. I tell them, I will answer you if I know. If I don't know, I'll tell you. I can't tell these boys that. Now, in Italy, I had a strange experience when I was over there, and this was the only international columnist I ever appeared on. I was mobbed over there by newspaper men and all. And the young boys, 18 and 19, were coming up to me in droves. And this girl that was my escort that teaches at the American school there in Rome, she used to come up, and these boys would be talking to me and trying to ask me questions in English. And this girl would come in and say, but the colonel speaks Italian. Oh, the boys would light up, and then I was stuck for the next half hour asking me questions. And I had to explain it to them in Italian. And these boys were interested. This happened, the same thing happened to me in the States here. The young boys coming up to me, 18 and 19. They want to know. So newsmen asked me about the Air Force and the dummies. I told them why they are dummies for what they did. I told them, please, gentlemen, don't ask me to criticize the Air Force. I fought with them in Korea. I have many friends in the Air Force. Don't ask me to criticize the sister service. I won't do it. But I will criticize the superiors. They didn't have to do this. It was stupid to do it. It wasn't necessary. They shouldn't have done it. They look like fools. Now, I will criticize them. It didn't have to be done that way. Look what I wrote there, the things I put in. People are eating this up. I never imagined I would write a book. I wrote this thing. I didn't imagine it ever go anyplace. It became a bestseller because the simple reason it was ready, people and the young people wanted to hear this stuff. They wanted to know. So the book rings of that it's authority. It is real. I lived through those things. And they recognize that. And they love it. They want to know more, though. Wilbur Smith, a Canadian genius, told me one day, he said, be careful, Colonel, from what you say, because every time you say something, you invite 1,000 questions. He said, wait till you retire or die. And I told him, oh, he was a Canadian genius on electromagnetism. I told him, Mr. Smith, I guess you're right. But tonight, I invite 1,000 questions. Don't be sure that I can answer all of them, but I invite the questions.
Before we go to questions, can you tell us a little bit about, well, one of the interesting things we were told at the house was he showed us a couple of chapters that may end up in your next book, if you agree to do this book. But in there, you showed a diagram to Jay-Z, which we were pretty surprised at because we had been taught very well, and one of the things we were taught was the double band, the electromagnetic bands going in counterclockwise rotation. That was the propulsion for the ship. And then we saw that on your diagram it was exactly the same. Could you tell us a little bit about the ship as well before we go to questions?
She explained it to me tonight. I told her, you know more about this than I do. Why don't you write a part that we put in the new book? And she does. What she explained to me tonight was real. She explained a lot of things I didn't know. So, and I want her now to write it and put it in the book. And I told her earlier, I told her, I'm going to put you on the spot. When you came and met me yesterday and you came up to me, I recognized you when you came up. We had met before. Now I'm going to put the burden on you. Where did we meet? I'm not going to tell you where I met you. You're going to tell me. So she's still pondering on that. I put her on the spot.
For those
She's
of
right.
you who don't know, Jay-Z was born right in Roswell, New Mexico, a year before the crash.
Yeah. There were two crashes. People don't know this. One crash was at Roswell, where Jay was born. The other crash was about 100 miles west at St. Augustine in the mountains. There were 6 bodies there we found. So there were 2 crashes. And I think that what happened, they came through the dimensional magnetic field, were thrown out of sequence, and they hit each other. It might have been the same craft that came from through the gate, because on my radars I had the gates we used to bring the targets in and shoot at them. And I think there's possibly a gate. Now please don't question me on this or hold me to this. I think they came through a dimensional gate when they hit. And I have other factors that explain some of this. And I think that there is real. There is some evidence that there are, Einstein said there was parallel universes. And another big mistake I made, when I was at the White House, we got in a discussion on Einstein. He was at Princeton. So I told the people, they said he's a one-worlder. I told them, you people are crazy. He's a scientist. I'm going up to see him. I put it off and put it off, and I never went. I missed out on going to meet one of the greatest brains the world has ever seen. My sequel book to this one, every chapter has at the end of it Einstein's explanation of what I saw. That's not in print yet. At times I get a little discouraged. I figured I'll start a big bonfire and get rid of them. People say, well, you owe this to the world. I told them, I don't know if I owe the world anything. I went through 3 wars. It was pretty terrible what the world did and what we did. I told them what I saw. Maybe I owe it to the world. Maybe I'll give it to them. And when I look at you people, I'm not going to burn them.
Ready for questions?
Yeah, anything.
Okay,
You're not going to get rid of me that quick. I'm not going away.
Those of you who have questions, we've got plenty of time for them. So if you want to line up along the back wall there.
Or if they don't line up, they go, well, just from their seats, if I can hear them, that's all right. I don't mind.
We've got we've got a procedure here.
Okay, anything wrong? Okay, you're the boss. I'm not a colonel anymore, so you give the orders. I'll tell you people a strange story. I know because of the movie you heard a lot about the Men in Black. So when I commanded the range in New Mexico, I picked up a trajectory. Something crashed in one of my debris area. So I went out in my airplane and I called Fort Bliss to give me a command car because my sedan, the dust came up through it. It wasn't any good. So I had this command car. Maybe you've seen pictures of General Patton riding them. They were high. And with those, I could cut straight across the desert. Sagebrush or desert didn't mean anything. So I had this command car, and I was out in the desert. And I flew out in my little airplane, and I saw something on the ground. And the trajectory, I checked with White Sands and Holloman Air Force Base, and I lied. I told them that I lost one of my RCAS, a radio-controlled aircraft we used to shoot missiles at, which I did. But I was checking on trajectory, and they confirmed that what my radars picked up was real. So I went out in the desert, and I came across it. So when I was coming back, I get a call. There were 2 range riders waiting for me in my headquarters from White Sands. They were range riders. They were White Sands security. So they were in my office. And they said, well, we came to talk to you about your burro, the donkey that I had. I told you about it. And I told them, gentlemen, don't kid me. You didn't come 150 miles to talk about my donkey. What do you want? They said, you were wandering around that range the last 2 days. What'd you see? One of my boosters fell. And they said, you can get in trouble for saying things like that. I can? Well, gentlemen, you're in trouble. You're under arrest. You have the nerve to come in my headquarters and threaten me? I'm the commander here. I just pressed a button. There's 10 armed men around this office. And I got my hand on the 45. You have the gall to threaten me. I'm the commander here. I should do like we used to do in the old days. Undress you naked, tie the hands behind you, and put you on the floor. And have your commander come and get you. I told him, take your guns out and be careful what you do. Put them on this table. I told him, now, call your commander. They called him. I got on the phone. I told him, what do you have here? They had the nerve to come here and threaten me? They're not under protective custody. I put them under arrest. I'm the authority in this area. I'm the commander. And he said, well, I apologize and all. They got over-enthusiastic. Maybe they did. But soldiers don't threaten people. I told Glenn Dennis at Roswell, that captain threatened him. I told him that wouldn't have happened. Any of my soldiers threaten civilians, they'll get court-martialed. Those things don't happen. They pay our salary. We're their soldiers. We don't threaten them. So these two men, the commander on the phone, he said, would you release them this time? Under one condition, I'll release your two punks, I told him, because I was angry by that time. Don't ever let them set foot in my area as long as I'm in command, because next time it's not going to be that easy. I'll release them. Now get them out of here. I told them, get out of here, both of you, and don't ever come back here while I'm here. Men in black. I don't know if they were men in black, but that's the only time I was ever threatened, and they paid for it. I figured, after all, at that time I'd been through 2 wars. They weren't coming in my headquarters and pulling that. I didn't care who they were. You see, so this was a funny story. When people talk about the men in black, there was no such thing. Sure, there's been threats. Sometimes counterintelligence boys get over-enthusiastic. Even the FBI didn't do it. I knew the deputy director. I knew J. Edgar Hoover personally. You don't go out and threaten civilians, American people. You don't do that. Those things aren't done. I told them, commanders don't tolerate things like that. Maybe sometime somebody down below gets over-enthusiastic, but he has to answer for it if he does. So that was my experience with the nearest thing I know about men in black. I never knew they existed. And I've been on the highest areas. I had the highest clearances. I was an intelligence officer. Security is my job. It doesn't happen that way. Those are just movie stories. My co-writer there, one day he sent me a list of questions, and I got angry at him. So I called him up on the phone, and I told him, quit watching X-Files. It's not like that. I told him, there's no files like that in the Pentagon. I told him, quit asking me that baloney. I don't answer those questions. They don't exist. Doesn't do that. I told him, stay off of that TV when you talk to me. So, you see, those things, a lot of the people gather those things from the movies and the things that happen. It's not that way at all, especially if you're on inside and know. People like me, we won't allow things like that to happen. After all, we're talking about the civilian public. I was drafted in the Army. My soldiers were real proud. They used to tell the other people, our old man was a GI once, he understands. And my own soldiers used to say that. After all, I was a civilian for many years. And those things aren't done. When you read about men in black, don't think, it doesn't happen. And I know from where I was. So, when you hear those stories, enjoy the movie Men in Black, but it's fiction. It doesn't happen that way. Yeah.
First question.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us. I too am an avid fan of Art Bell, and I heard you on his program, and I think shortly after you had been on there, Art Bell had received some information about us not being able to go back to space. This was shortly after John Glenn was announced being able to, go back to space and maybe a project heading back to the moon. He got information saying hands off, no more exploration of space. Can you enlighten us more on what's happening out there? Why we're not allowed to explore or go away toward the moon?
Go towards the moon?
Well, we're not supposed to. It's been like a hands off, no more exploration.
Well, I knew a lot about NASA. And in my opinion, and I've discussed this many times, did we get scared off? Did something happen up there that scared them off? I think something happened. Project Horizon that we perfected, and we let them think that we were aiming at the Russians. We weren't. We were aiming at military call on the moon to protect us from other aliens. I was head of the Foreign Technology Division, but that foreign word didn't mean other countries on this world. It meant other worlds too. And we had the motto, if they're enemies, we're not going to take the chance that they're friendly. Just in case, we're going to be ready. The Project Horizon, the military on the colony on the moon, was aimed at just that. There was a presence up there. The astronauts saw them. They were watching them. Soviet Union went to Mars, a probe. The probe was destroyed and fell. The Soviets got angry. They think that it came from Phobos, the moon. That moon on Mars goes the opposite way. It shouldn't go that way. It's an opening. Is it a base? The Russians decided to hit it with laser. Laser weapons that we perfected need no lead time. You aim at an airplane, it reaches there instantaneous. It travels 180,000 miles a second, and it burns right through. So the Russians decided they were going to hit Phobos. We stopped them. Maybe they should have. Astronauts have stated somebody was watching them on the moon. Of course, I say, was NASA scared off? If they had enough brains, maybe they should have been scared off. But I don't think that their whole system was that good to even think that way. And the explanation to that is very simple. I went to General Trudeau one day and I asked him, General, how do you fight stupidity? General Trudeau said, I don't know, Phil. When you find out, let me know. Is this what happened with NASA being, were they just too stupid or were they scared off? I don't go for what NASA's doing. What they're doing won't succeed. It can't. They spend, Apollo alone cost $24 billion. All we got out of it, we landed the man on the moon. So what after that? They can't explore space. They can't take man up there. They spend trillions of dollars. They got to send a robot up. They can't send man up. Why didn't they start on that? They didn't start on a new science, as I did before, and I refused to go back to NASA while I was in. They started on project improvement. NASA had 400,000 people working on their projects. 400,000, I'm not exaggerating the figure. 40,000 different industries. There's where the money was going. The shuttle is just an extension of airplanes. That thing can't go in space. It has to be pushed up there and then can come back. What's it accomplished all these years? I don't know. What great advancements have they made for the trillions that they spent? I don't know. If you read through the lines on the book practically is an indictment of NASA. The Army did this with limited budgets and had to keep it quiet. What did you do with your billions? Almost trillions. Didn't accomplish much. Can any of you tell me what they accomplished? I had all the clearances. I was involved. I don't know. In fact, I told the general I refused to go over there anymore and talk to him. Why? It's a boondoggle bureaucratic agency. North American spent I don't know how many millions of dollars for the first lunar module. When it arrived to be ready to go on space, it had 20,000 defects, 20,000 in a module. Grissom, the killed in the flash fire, he hung a lemon outside the door. I don't know if you know that, but that thing was so bad. Now, if you spend $1 billion, you should get something for it. Not send it with 20,000 defects. 20,000, mind. Can you imagine that figure? What were their engineers thinking? Why, I tell them on things like that, if I was involved in anything like that, General Trudeau would have thrown me out of the top Pentagon window. You don't operate that way. Now, why are they operating that way? They're approaching it wrong. You can't improve what we got. This is a new science we're up against with the flying saucers. Where do you go for reference? There is no reference material. Where do you go for background? There isn't any. Who can you talk to? Nobody knows. It's a brand new science. You got to start from zero and start working up because you're constantly confronted by state-of-the-art. State-of-the-art sometimes costs a lot of money to overcome. But when you're in this new science, you're hit with state-of-the-art every day. I used to be in a situation, I used to go out to industry and check the contracts. In the military, in our research and development, people don't know this, we gave out contracts which were RD, T, and E, research, development, test, and evaluation. When we perfected, or wanted something perfected, and started to be built, we gave out the first contracts. It wasn't procurement, it was us. So I had to go to I had the job of going to industry and checking the first production line item. At least 50% of the time, I didn't accept it. I used to tell them, big industry, Fortune 500 people, I used to tell them, that's not what we contracted for. Well, if we did what you wanted, we'd go broke. You bought in on the contract, didn't you? No more cost overruns. Well, some of these executives and CEOs, they started to hate my guts. One of them told me one day, we're going to report you to the general. Please do. I'll call him for you. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I have authority to cancel you right on the spot. I'm not going to do that. You know why? I'm going to arrange a conference with you and the general. You come and plead your case, and I'll be standing sitting there too. And you better come up with the right things. No more of this cost overrun baloney. That you think that we'll finance you no matter what you ask for. Those days are finished. We've dispensed in my day $2 billion. That was a lot of money. Yet I was always fighting the state-of-the-art, cost overruns. And I wasn't too nice about it. I used to cancel their contracts. What was I going to do? Go along with them? NASA, they don't bother canceling contracts. Civilian organization. Up to 1958, we were in charge of space, the Army. 1958, they took it away from us, and they created NASA. They tried to strip everything from the Army. They didn't like us. That was the days of all the talk on civilian control. They wanted to wipe us out if they could. They didn't like us because they couldn't control us. And we weren't about to be controlled by those bureaucrats. So this is the answer, I think, to your question. I don't know if we were scared off or it was stupidity. I think we were scared off. We didn't know what to do. We perfected Star Wars for that reason, so that we could hit them. We didn't want to look helpless if they did. They performed covert acts against us. They brought down our planes. Wien von Braun said they knocked some of our missiles off track. Did they do it by design or by chance? I don't know. But we didn't take any chances. If they did it by design, we wanted to be ready. So the motto was, just in case, we're going to be ready. We're going to show them that we have weapons, and maybe the laser, that's what it was perfected for. But we had to be careful, the laser. It came into existence 1960. We had to be careful with laser weapons. If we exposed a laser in this crowd, it might have blinded everybody in here. It was so powerful and intense. We had people working on it, they used to say it looked like our eyes were going to pop out of our heads. It was dangerous. It was a dangerous weapon. But we perfected one, a rangefinder. And then we perfected also the cataract remover, which is laser. I had a little instrument about this long. It could cut through, and one ray would even reject cells in the human body. It would reject them. It wouldn't cut through the cells, and then it would sear. I had this little thing. It came out of Roswell, and typical again, I didn't know what it was. I couldn't even activate it. Finally, I took it to our laboratory, and it activated. It was a laser. A wonderful instrument, way advanced at its time. Then I sent it to Fort Monmouth, our electronic laboratories. So I guess that's the answer I got to give you. That was a lengthy answer. I wish I could give you a more definite answer, but I don't know.
Thank you.
I have seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind at least 18 times since it's come out.
I can't hear that.
How do I have seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind at least 18 times since it has come out. And my question, though you kind of poo-pooed Men in Black, is really more about that film entirely and an agenda, if you see one, at large. Do you have any information on Steven Spielberg, on the production of that movie? Do you have any thoughts about E.T., the fact that Harrison Ford's wife wrote it?
So many.
She's asking about the movie Close Encounters. If you have any information about Spielberg or the making of the movie, or the movie E.T. also.
Yeah.
Do you see an intent here? Do you see a choreography
Well,
here in what you have experienced?
Most of these movies that you see, I say they're maybe 1/4 based on fact. They base them on fact. Some of these pretty smart men there, intelligent men. The doctor on Voyager that runs the instrument over people, I had one like that. That's the one where I told you I was a stupid human being. I thought the battery was dead. I had something like
Tricorder.
I had something like that. That was based on actual fact. I had one. And I was taught by Italian doctors when I was in Rome that, for example, what they taught me was paralysis. They say paralysis, for example, it's not that it's not receiving, the muscle's not receiving commands from the brain. Sometimes the paralysis is that the muscle is receiving the wrong wavelength. So this doctor I knew over there, first man that photographed brain waves, those of a rabbit. He had an instrument made, he called it a resonator, and he would correct that wrong wavelength going in there. E.T., I think E.T. was mostly fiction. Good entertainment. My grandchildren liked it. In fact, my little grandson, I told you, he asked me, did you ever see E.T.'s grandfather? So it impressed him. No, E.T. was most. In Close Encounters, there was a lot of fact. Remember the man that was in charge? Jacques Vallee. I know him. Brilliant man. He's the one asked me if I, and I said before, asked me if I was an alien. And I told him, Jack, you're a brilliant man. You know better than ask me that, or answer that question. And Close Encounters was a little more towards fact, based on fact.
Do you see an agenda? Do you see the fact that they're releasing even 1/4 in this film and 1/4 in that film?
I didn't hear that either.
She's asking you about the propaganda about film. Is it propaganda? Is it something that's information being released by the government through the filmmakers?
No,
Agenda.
no.
I had a second.
The government's not releasing it.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of this material has been lost. Like people say, government cover-up. There was no cover-up. We didn't try to cover it up. The way we operated, we had to keep it secret because to protect our organization. And they would have tabbed us as kooks, and the stupid Congress would have taken our budget and destroyed a good organization. And I always tell people, in fact, let the government alone, it'll cover itself up. I had an experience lately on that. I testified before the missing prisoners of war. I actually was in charge in Korea. I was on MacArthur's staff, and one thing I was in charge of was prisoner of war camps in enemy territory. So I was called in front of the Senate committee and the House committee to testify. And my son asked me, "Why are you doing that?" I told him, "Well, just come with me sometime and look at the faces of the families whose sons and fathers these were, and you'll see." I told him also, I was with a lot of these men, and we abandoned them. And I told the Senate, it amazes me to think that people like Scowcroft and Kissinger get up here in front of you and say that they didn't have any information on this. I personally send the information at least twice a week over teleconference from Tokyo. 2 days ago, I got a call from a Navy commander, highly decorated Navy commander, a good friend of mine, fought in 11 campaigns. And he's on his POW question. He asked me if I saw the New York Times article. I told him, yes, I saw it. He said, did you read what they say? Yes, I read it. I wrote that report in 1952. And yet they said they couldn't find it. There was nothing there. They didn't look for it. They didn't want to know. And let me tell you what happened with President Eisenhower. I was called and went with C.D. Jackson, President Specialist, to see the President on the prisoner of war question. And newspapers twisted around and said that I discussed with President Eisenhower to cover up the prisoners were there. It wasn't true. The President told me, if I'd have known this, I would never have signed the peace treaty. General Clark wanted to start the war all over again to get our prisoners. I was at Panmunjom. I was a member of the truce delegation. I sat right there, and these men, when they were coming back, I greeted them, and I told the Senate, who else can say this? I was on the ground. I was told there were 500 sick and wounded 10 miles from there. They asked me, who told you that? I got the first from a Korean colonel who was on our delegation. The second information I got from our own men being exchanged coming across, our own soldiers. They never gave one of those back. I wrote this up. The Chinese general broke a pencil in half when he heard this. He thought it was going to affect the truth of it. None of those boys returned. They were all killed or died. They were sick and wounded. I send those reports in myself, yet the higher-ups said that no such thing was air. This is the same thing that happens on the flying saucer. The government is such a vast organization that things get lost, get thrown away, no interest, people don't want to be bothered. You'd be surprised what happens in the government. I used to be surprised. I had a high official, I used to meet him once a week, and he used to drink and get angry. He said, some of these high officials are so damn dumb you can't even imagine. I told him, don't tell me, Bob, I'm at the White House. I see them every day. And I'm telling you, I heard some things on the National Security Council that I used to stand there and listen, and I figured, it can't be, I can't be hearing this. They can't be that dumb. But they were. And I had to sit there and listen to this. So you say the reports, they were there, but they didn't care. The flying saucer was the same thing. They already had started a label anybody that talked about flying saucers. They're kooks. Now, when I was in research and development, strange to say this, we worked that to our advantage. We encouraged the skeptics and the critics. Why did we encourage them? The more they screamed and hollered, the better we liked it. Because the government came up and said no such thing does exist. How could we perfect something from something that didn't exist? It was perfect for us, so we encouraged it, because we knew what our opposition was like. So we liked that. Was it a cover-up? Not in the sense that people thought that somebody deliberately said cover it up. It didn't work that way, unfortunately. The government doesn't work like that. As I say, leave it alone, it'll cover itself up. And that's true. Strange. Remember now, I was on the National Security Council, the top. I saw this myself. Look at the report in the New York Times 2 days ago. It just came public. It was written in 1952. Where's it been all this time? High officials, Secretary of State, Kissinger, says that they don't exist. He never looked for them. He didn't want to look for them. They were there. So these things happen every day, unfortunately. The government is in factions, too. You understand how the different factions react against each other. I discussed this with Attorney General Robert Kennedy. I testified for 2 days in front of Congress on how the government operated, the shadow government operated. And I told Robert Kennedy one day, I sat in his office, he was Attorney General, and I told him this direct, Mr. Attorney General, if you and your brother think you make policy, you're sadly mistaken, you don't.
Okay, Colonel. You want to tell us about what you were beginning to tell us about the shadow government?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they asked me if I get tired. As long as you want to listen to me, I won't get tired. And when I look in an audience like this, I'll go all night if you want me to. Now I want to tell you something that I don't think you've ever heard before, but you suspect that it happened. And I'm going to start a little bit back. During the end of the Korean War, I was on the truce delegation at Panmunjom in Korea. We were negotiating a return of sick and wounded prisoners and our prisoners. And I was one on the delegation. One night, my roommate, tent mate actually, was a Marine colonel. And he asked me, he said, what's the matter with you? Of course, can't you sleep tonight? I told him, no. I told him, you hear those cannons firing? That's Pork Chop Hill. I never knew that General Trudeau was the division commander, my old boss later. He told me later, he said, Phil, those attacks up there, now he was the type of man that he told Ridgway, either get my men out or I'm going up there with them. He took his helmet off with 2 stars on it, put a sergeant's helmet on, and went up and fought with his men. Major general. That shows you why I like the man. So my tent mate said, "Can't you sleep?" I told him, "No. What I think about those traitors back here that are given what we're going to do, and when we attack, are passing it to the enemy from Washington. They know every time we attack, and we lost a lot of men. I hope to God he puts me in a position where I can find them, who they are." I never had the good Lord ever answer my prayer so fast. Next morning, General Harrison, the chief delegate, Lieutenant General, called me. He said, "I hear Admiral Daniel told me you have your orders to go home." I told him, "General, I've had them for 4 months." He said, "Where's your family?" I told him, "Call them, you're coming home." He said, "We might be here forever." Now, General Harrison, never once did I walk in his tent that he didn't have a Bible open on his desk. That's the type of man he was. So, I get my family in Tokyo, take off for home in Pennsylvania. We took a ship, so it took about 2 weeks. Second day I was home, I get a telegram from the Pentagon, report to the Pentagon. So I had 2 days leave. I got to the Pentagon and they asked me about some prisoners and things of that type. And there was an order there from the Special Assistant to the President ordering me over to the White House. How that happened, I don't know. But there I was, in the only position possible where I could find out who was doing this, who the traitors were. There was no other place to find out but the White House staff. And there I was. Well, I think back, a little over 2 weeks ago, I asked the good Lord a prayer, put me there. And there I was. Who did that? I never knew I was going to the White House. I never expected to sit on the National Security Council, but I was there. I found out who they were, all of them. So, in 1962, I was called, a man came to my house, the deputy counsel of the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. He wanted me to testify on my 4 years at the White House. I told him, "No, I won't testify. Why should I? I take all the risks. I testify, you print it up, you put it in the archives, and it gathers dust forever. Nothing doing." Next day, the counsel calls me, a man named Sarwine, big gruff man. I went up on Capitol Hill. I was still in uniform. And he said, "Colonel, we want you to testify." I told Miss Sarwine, "I told your deputy that you sent out there, no, I won't testify. Why should I? You won't do anything with it." So he leaned over, he said, "Colonel, I'll subpoena you." So I told Mr. Sarwine, "Go ahead, subpoena me, but you sure as hell can't make me talk." And all at once he started to laugh. And I was friends with the old boy until he died after that. Many years later. He started to laugh, and I figured, what is he laughing? This is not funny. But he said, "I was told that you'd say something like that." He said, "Man like you always wants something. You remember the EBI, the human terms? I asked you, what's in it for me?" I told him, "Yes, Mr. Sarwine, I want something." "What do you want?" "That you promise me you'll put my testimony in the hands of the Kennedys. Let the chips fall where they may. That's my terms. That's all. Come up tomorrow." Next day I come up, he takes me to Senator Eastland, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Tough senator, good one. Eastland said, I heard your terms. Colonel, I promise you I'll put it in their hands personally. I told him, Senator, call your committee together. I'm ready to testify now. And I testified for 2 days. About 2 weeks later, the counsel of the Department of Defense calls me, and he was sort of shaky. He said, I just got a call from the Attorney General. He wants to see you. And of course, those bureaucratic counsels like that get scared when they hear the Attorney General was Robert Kennedy. So I went up down to the Department of Justice and went and walked in his office. And I was still in uniform too then. So I walked in, he asked me to sit down, and I told him, Mr. Attorney General, if you and your brother think you make policy, you're mistaken. I thought he's not going to take this too nice. Instead, he said, yes, I know that. I've been going through your testimony. I realize this. You and I have a lot to talk about. There was 2 volumes on his desk in my testimony. Eastland kept his word. And we became great friends after that. Now, there was a system. They actually went after General Trudeau also because of me. The government had created a system where OSS split up. Part of the OSS, and I never did like them. I was even enemies with them in Korea, and I was enemies with CIA all my life. Outspoken, this wasn't hidden. And it really got them when I ended up at the White House over top of them. They said the bad penny always keeps showing up, they used to say. They couldn't understand how I got that position. I didn't understand myself, so I couldn't tell anybody. So when they organized CIA, at the State Department, they had the policy planning staff. At CIA, they had the Board of National Estimates. Now, what I'm telling you is hardly known even to professors on the government. An organization, a system that I admire. It was so cleverly and so well done. It could only be uncovered by an intelligence officer, a trained intelligence. So well was it done. The system was that the State Department would write a paragraph to them, their own people, on what policy, new policy to create. And CIA would go ahead and make what they called a national intelligence estimate. These were always top secret, all of them. So I start looking at these things. These were national intelligence estimates were supposedly to be based on true hard intelligence. They weren't. They were based on ideology and what they thought was right, this group. This group figured the president was only here for a few years. We don't pay any attention to him. We run the policy. And they did. So I got wind of this. I uncovered it and I went to General Trudeau. He was chief of intelligence. He refused to comment on the papers ahead of time. I saw one estimate where the Army, Navy, and Air Force dissented in its entirety, yet it became national policy. And they wanted General Trudeau to comment on it. They'd pass it around the government as a show on Friday afternoon and send it back Saturday. So the general refused to do it, and they came after him. Actually, they got him transferred. He ended up in Hokkaido, Korea. But with some friends of mine who were there, former ambassadors, we went to see Senator Bridges, Chairman Armed Services Committee. Senator Bridges, when he heard the story, he got up out of his chair, and the little guy was a giant. And he said, "Gentlemen, thank you. I promise you, until General Trudeau gets promoted, there won't be another promotion in the Army, in the general air. He kept his word. General Trudeau was promoted to 3 stars and became a Corps commander after Allen Dulles had him suspended. And he came through it. Of course, we came to his defense. In the meantime, on the internet, some drawings appeared on me that I was a space traveler and everything, and I have copies of them. They're all in color. One of the things they accused me of, my critics now, because of this book, and I criticize CIA, was that I was a member of Galen's outfit. Well, the true story is I destroyed Galen's outfit in Germany. It was completely CIA run. It was supposed to be intelligence. It was penetrated to the hilt by communists. So when he suspended General Trudeau, I went to the Special Intelligence, friends of mine, and I was part of it, and I sent a telegram to Germany, to the agents there, Army, and I told them, the telegram was, gentlemen, we owe General Trudeau a lot, what he's done for us. I want you to gather all the information on how Galen is penetrated. They got it. I released it to the newspapers. Galen's outfit was wiped out. It was completely CIA controlled. Well, they didn't forgive me for that. But I was expected. A lot of times they say a man is known by his enemies and not his friends. And I was proud to have CIA as my enemy. Didn't like him any. And by the way, I used to tell the higher-ups of CIA this personally. It wasn't that I'm just telling you, and I didn't say it in Washington. This was known, and I said it out in the open. So then we started attacking the Board of National Estimates, the basis of policy. All the policy, and when I testified, Senator McMain said that he doubted that. I told him, Senator, you better believe it. And I started quoting policy and the numbers, the top secret papers. He got up and walked out. He knew that I was opening up the Pandora's box. You want to know the policy? I'll tell you what it is. And all the presidents were guilty. They didn't know any different. The policy invariably favored the communist, Russian communist. They were good people, don't be strident, and all that was in the policy. Our enemies, who said they were going to destroy us. So when I testified, Senator Keating asked me, are these people you're talking about? And I had the names of every one of them. Communist? I told him, Senator, I don't deal in labels. Unless I see their party card, I won't call anybody communist. But I have a name overall for them. And he said, what's that? International Socialists, allied with the British white socialists. The Italians told me our embassy was socialist. They want us to come down to the communist level, and the communists come up, and we'll be one big happy world. Maybe this is hard to take, but this is true. Policy papers read that way, what I'm saying. So the battle was joined at that stage. We had to get them out, or they get us. We just about put them out of business, because I had good friends in the newspaper business, and the stories would appear. Just 2 years ago, CIA admitted that their intelligence, that national intelligence estimates were slanted and not based on true intelligence. It took them that long to admit it, and that's what we were fighting. This group was so powerful that they controlled policy. And the strange thing happened when I testified in front of the House Committee on MIAs. Congressman Dorman was chairman. They had me testify before the Czech General, because the Czech General who told him how our boys were tortured in the hospitals and so on. He had threats on his life, so they wanted me to run interference for him. I told him, I'll testify first to confirm what the general said was true. And I did that. So the whole system was geared in that direction. And we were living under that policy guidance. Not on hard intelligence, ideology and fabricated intelligence. And I showed the committee this. And when I went up in front of Dornan, when I was testifying, he said, "Colonel, is your testimony still classified?" "Yes, sir. After all these years, it's still classified. They don't even go after the 30-year rule." I tried to get it declassified, and you know what they told me? I told the chairman, and all these audience was there, newsmen and all. They said that they wouldn't release it because they had to protect the source. And I told the people that said that, "Hey, I'm the source, and I don't want to be protected." And all the audience started to clap and cheer, even the newsmen. And Dornan was flabbergasted, and he laughed. And I figured, what did I say was so funny? Everybody thought it was a big thing. You know, I said, "I don't want to be protected. So release it." Well, they still haven't released it. It's still classified top secret, and I name all of them, including the media and the people that were on their side. This was the government that we were under. It wasn't run by the president. They didn't pay any attention to him. Robert Kennedy admitted that to me. We became great friends. So he proceeded to set up the special group counterinsurgency. That group took away the authority from CIA. He was shot. And I still to this day figure, did I have a hand in his assassination when I convinced him to do that? I don't know. But anyway, he took that on my advice. And actually, we became good friends. I wish he'd have become president. He wasn't like Jack. This was a tough, hard man. Brilliant. He was a good man. I think Bobby Kennedy would have made an excellent president. CIA wasn't pulling the hood over his eyes. The other presidents, a lot of them were too busy to recognize this and what it meant. I actually saw national intelligence estimates which said, let's give all our secrets to the Soviet Union so they'll trust us. I think, geez, imagine things like that, give them all our secrets so they'll trust us. They said they were going to destroy us. It almost became a religion to these people. And I say, I'm glad I had a hand. I uncovered it because of my training. I was very fortunate. I was put in that position. And I think we changed it. And I even briefed President Eisenhower. So I'm very proud of that. I think I had a hand in doing it. And